Wealthy entrepreneur slaps his pregnant wife in public in front of his mistress, but he didn't know they were watching. The crowned wolf of elite society, Julian Roth, a self-made tycoon known for his impeccable suits, a sky-high penthouse, and a pregnant wife adored by many. Yet beneath the front-page glamour and dazzling charity galas, something darker simmered. There were rumors, a mistress whose charm threatened to unravel the picture-perfect marriage. But no one could have predicted the public explosion that would soon unfold, nor the moment Julian's fury spiraled into an act that shocked everyone. What he didn't know was that his wife had a devastating secret of her own, one that would upend everything he thought he controlled. Julian Roth was the embodiment of the American dream. Born in a struggling Detroit neighborhood, he had clawed his way to the top with unyielding ambition. By his mid-30s, he was the head of Roth Dynamics, a vast empire covering tech, real estate ventures, boutique hotels, and charitable initiatives. People admired his cinematic smile and envied the golden life he appeared to lead. Each morning, Julian's private driver delivered him to the towering 60-story Roth Tower in downtown Chicago, proudly bearing his name. Inside, employees whispered about his legendary dedication, arriving before sunrise, leaving only when the skyline glowed with city lights. Polished, commanding, and forever composed, Julian had a reputation for turning every project he touched into gold. The media adored him, portraying him as both a groundbreaking mogul and the ideal husband. His wife, Camille Roth, née Whitaker, was the graceful daughter of real estate giant Richard Whitaker. Their wedding, just 2 years earlier, had been a grand affair at Chicago's historic Blackstone Hotel, attended by dignitaries, celebrities, and global power players. Camille moved with refined elegance, earning her the nickname the Dove among society's elite. Camille's dedication to philanthropy, organizing children's hospital drives and supporting women's shelters, made her a beloved figure among the city's social elite. When news of her pregnancy surfaced, the tabloids erupted with joy over the next chapter in the Roth fairy tale. Editors battled for exclusive announcements and nursery previews. Paparazzi camped outside every high-end OB/GYN clinic in downtown Chicago, desperate for a glimpse of the couple leaving with ultrasound photos in hand. But even amid this gilded life, cracks began to surface. Camille sensed Julian's growing distance. His frequent business trips to Vancouver didn't align with Roth Dynamics' official schedule. Private dinner plans were regularly canceled at the last moment. She told herself it was simply the price of ambition. Her father, after all, had poured his life into the Whitaker empire. Maybe Julian, in his relentless pursuit of greatness, was just overworked. Still, a quiet unease wove through their home. Julian's temper had grown shorter, his stares more vacant, and resentments lingered unspoken. He rarely attended her prenatal appointments anymore, sending a personal assistant instead with apologies wrapped in urgent meetings. Camille brushed it off. She told herself she could do this pregnancy alone if she had to. But fate had a habit of exposing lies. Unknown to Camille, Julian was keeping secrets. At Roth Tower, whispers swirled. Some employees had seen a woman leaving his office late at night, dressed in luxury labels like Dior and Valentino, stepping into a sleek black sedan that didn't belong to Camille. Yet, fear of Julian's wrath kept mouths closed and suspicions buried. Camille continued her charity work, often resting her hands protectively on her growing stomach. She still believed in Julian's love, in the world they had built. But as the city churned beneath their skyscrapers, a storm of betrayal, heartbreak, and truths waited to erupt. The first to sense the shift was Natalie Price, Julian's long-trusted assistant. Sharp and observant, Natalie had joined Roth Dynamics fresh out of college and earned Julian's confidence through sheer dedication. But in recent months, she noticed inconsistencies. Meetings held in places not listed on official calendars, lavish floral deliveries addressed to unknown recipients, credit card charges for dinners she never booked. One afternoon, she ran into Camille in the executive lounge. Camille looked pale, rubbing her lower back, the pregnancy clearly taking a toll. Still, she wore her usual grace. Natalie approached carefully. "Mrs. Roth, how are you feeling?" Camille offered a faint smile. "Tired, but that's normal, right? Third trimester isn't exactly a walk in the park." Natalie nodded, debating whether to say more. Something in Camille's eyes seemed to ask for the truth. If you need anything, I'm here, Natalie said gently, her voice intentionally neutral. She couldn't afford to voice any suspicions about Julian, not in a corporate setting. Camille's eyes softened with a flicker of appreciation. Thank you, Natalie. I'll remember that. The tension lingered in the air, subtle but suffocating. Camille's smile faded the moment Natalie turned away, her hand instinctively resting over her belly. The growing life inside her felt more fragile than ever. She glanced at the photos on her desk, images from their wedding, from happier times, and for the first time she wondered how much of it had been real. That evening, Natalie found Julian in his office, rifling through files with impatient energy. His tie was undone, his expression taut with irritation. "Natalie," he said without looking up, "there's a red folder on your desk. Get a courier to deliver it immediately to the Halston Hotel. Mark it private and confidential." She hesitated. "Sir, do you mean the Roth-Halston property in Vancouver?" His gaze snapped to hers, sharp. "No, the Halston in downtown Chicago." It was just minutes from their headquarters. A courier seemed unnecessary, but she gave a quick nod, not daring to question him further. After he left, she checked the envelope carefully. The recipient was listed as Miss Sabrina Devereaux, Suite 4201, the Halston. Natalie's stomach knotted. That name wasn't linked to any vendors or partners. Still, she sealed the folder and made the call, but her thoughts raced. The air around Roth Tower had shifted in recent months, a chill of secrecy that clung to closed doors and after-hours meetings. Natalie had noticed. Everyone had. But no one dared to name what they feared. Not yet. Meanwhile, Camille's father, Richard Whitaker, was growing uneasy. A seasoned businessman himself, he noticed troubling patterns. Deals that once ran smoothly now clouded with vague contracts and complex disclaimers. During a Whitaker Foundation dinner, he approached Julian discreetly. "Julian," he said, hand resting firmly on his son-in-law's shoulder, "I've noticed some unusual directions in your recent expansions. Are you sure you're not overreaching, especially now, with the baby on the way?" Julian forced a smile. "I appreciate the concern, sir, but I've got it handled. I'm on the cusp of something that's going to place Roth Dynamics on the global map like never before." Richard wasn't convinced. His gaze drifted toward Camille. She stood across the room, poised as always, but her shoulders carried a weight he hadn't seen before. She smiled at guests, but her eyes never settled. That flicker of unrest lodged itself deep in Richard's gut. The uneasy glint in her expression mirrored his growing doubts. Beneath the surface of refinement, something felt terribly off. But how deep the fractures ran, he couldn't yet tell. Whispers echoed through the halls of Roth Tower, subtle warnings lost on those unwilling to see. In the heart of Chicago, a story of deception was brewing. One that would explode with a force even the city's sleepless skyline couldn't anticipate. Midweek, Julian stepped into a private elevator at the Halston Hotel. The soft hum carried him to the top floor, where Sabrina Devereaux waited. When she opened the door, she wore a crimson silk robe, lips curled into a slow, smoky smile. Alluring, untamed, Sabrina was the kind of woman who seemed made to unravel powerful men. She claimed to be an art dealer from Marseille, expanding her client list in Chicago, but her meetings with Julian had little to do with actual business. "Darling," Sabrina purred, stepping aside as he entered the penthouse suite. The space was extravagant, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline, ivory sofas, and an unmistakable cloud of perfume clinging to the air. Julian shrugged off his coat, nerves frayed. He had canceled 2 meetings at Roth Tower to be here, something his earlier, more disciplined self would have never done. But Sabrina's magnetism was undeniable. His mind, once razor-focused on mergers and boardroom power plays, now unraveled the moment her perfume hit him. The high-rise air felt electric around her, the silence between them charged with indulgence and escape. She had a way of making him forget his responsibilities, his marriage, even the unborn child he hadn't yet held. "I can't stay long," he murmured, though his voice lacked conviction. "I just needed to see you." Her laugh was low, seductive. "I'm flattered. I was beginning to think your wife had tightened the leash." He stiffened at Camille's name. "Let's not talk about her," he said curtly. Sabrina arched a brow. "Your call." She slipped her arms around his neck. "Anyway, I've got a surprise for you." She led him to a small marble table, where a bottle of vintage champagne rested in a silver bucket. He raised an eyebrow. You didn't have to. She winked. A toast to our next move. I'll be flying to Europe soon for an auction. Maybe Roth Dynamics would like to sponsor the trip? You could tag along, make it business. The offer lingered, loaded with more than just financial opportunity. Julian considered it, brushing aside the flicker of guilt. In his mind, Camille's face threatened to surface, tired but serene, cradling her growing belly, but he shoved it aside, burying the image beneath ambition and lust. We'll see, he said quietly. He popped the cork and they drank. Sabrina swirled her glass, her eyes never leaving his. In that moment, everything else faded. The city, the boardroom chaos, even Camille's silence, all dissolved in the glint of champagne and the shimmer of Sabrina's smile. What Julian didn't know was that Sabrina had her own plan. She'd begun casually prying about his accounts, his future ventures, his powerful acquaintances. She craved the prestige that came with being close to Julian Roth, viewing this affair as a stepping stone to something far more influential. Every word she whispered, every lingering touch was calculated. She memorized names, followed financial leads, and plotted the kind of access only men like Julian could give her. Every now and then, she caught her reflection in the mirror and smiled. It was all working. They spent another hour together. When Julian finally left, he pressed a lingering kiss to her lips. As he stepped into the hallway, unease rippled through him. What if someone saw me? But he shook it off. He was Julian Roth, untouchable. What he couldn't have known was that, just a few feet away, a bellhop named Marco Villanueva recognized him instantly. Marco had served at the Whitaker Foundation's gala the year before and remembered Julian well. Moments later, Marco reached for his phone, a call that would spark the unraveling of Julian Roth's tightly protected double life, one that would soon explode in public view, dragging Camille, Sabrina, and everyone around them into the fallout. The following evening, Camille sat at the edge of the penthouse sofa, flipping through cutouts of nursery inspiration from interior magazines. She had envisioned a palette of soft mint, sage, and lilac, colors that would soothe and welcome their baby into a peaceful space. Julian, however, had contributed little. Every time she asked, he referenced pressing matters at work. Each unanswered question, each avoided suggestion, became a stitch in the widening seam between them, unraveling the warmth she had once trusted so deeply. When he finally walked in, the stress in his body was impossible to miss. He moved past the array of fabric samples and baby catalogs without a word, not even a glance. Camille's heart sank. It wasn't just the silence, it was the indifference. She pushed aside the hurt and approached him gently. Julian, there's a charity gala next Friday for the Children's Hospital. I'm co-hosting it. Will you be able to come? He didn't meet her gaze, tugging his tie loose. I don't know. I might be out of town, he said flatly. She set her magazine down. Out of town again? Where this time? He shot her a look, sharp, impatient. I need to wrap up an international deal. That's it. His tone made it clear. No further discussion. Camille felt frustration stir beneath her chest, but her voice stayed even. You've been traveling a lot lately. Vancouver, Toronto, even hotels here in Chicago. Are you sure all of these trips are really about business? He turned toward her slowly, eyes glinting cold. You're checking up on me? Is that what we are now? Me justifying every second of my schedule? Camille closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. It's not checking up. I want my husband here. I've gone to every appointment alone. The baby's due in a few weeks. Don't you want to be here? For us? Julian's jaw clenched. For a moment, something like guilt flickered. But it vanished behind a wall of defensiveness. I'm building our future, Camille. You think this life just pays for itself? If I don't keep these deals moving, everything we've built could fall apart. His words landed like blows, not because of their volume, but their distance. She wasn't asking for opulence. She was asking for presence. And he couldn't offer even that. Her chin quivered, but she didn't let tears come. You've changed, she whispered. Somewhere along the way, you became someone I barely recognize. He stared at her, words unspoken choking in his throat. Then, without a reply, he turned and stormed into his study. Camille stood frozen in the living room, her heart pounding in the silence he left behind. The gulf between them felt wider than ever. Inside his study, Julian dropped into his leather chair. The city glimmered beyond the tall windows, but he couldn't see it. All he saw was his reflection, hollow eyes, jaw tight. A man torn between two worlds, the intoxicating escape Sabrina offered, the steadfast devotion Camille still gave him, and the child that tied them together. The success he had once celebrated now felt like a cage. Gilded, yes, but suffocating. He didn't want to think about it. Not tonight. But the weight pressed in, and he suddenly realized he was the one who had built this prison. As Julien sat alone in the dim study, Camille's phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. A text appeared from an unknown number. "I have information about your husband. We should talk. Marco Villanueva." Camille's brow furrowed. The name meant nothing to her, but something in the message's urgency struck a chord, an unsettling mixture of anxiety and instinct. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the phone, pulse quickening, the heaviness of dread pressing on her chest like a stone. She opened the message with a trembling finger, unaware that she was about to pry open the walls Julien had spent months carefully constructing around his secret life. Early the next morning, Camille slipped quietly into a small cafe tucked away in a quiet corner of downtown. She wore a modest black trench coat, her scarf pulled loosely around her neck to obscure her face. In a corner booth sat a young man in a bellhop uniform, his name tag reading Marco Villanueva. He looked nervous, stirring his coffee without pause. When she approached, he quickly stood. "Mrs. Roth, it's an honor to meet you." "Just Camille," she said softly, sliding into the seat across from him. Marco nodded, his eyes darting toward the door as though he feared someone might be listening. "I don't know how to say this exactly. I saw your husband at the Halston Hotel." He paused, eyes full of hesitation. "He was visiting a suite on the top floor. More than once. I recognized him from that fundraiser last year." "And he wasn't with you." Camille's stomach dropped. Her breath caught in her chest, but she kept her face composed. It was as if time paused, her body numb, her mind spiraling in slow-motion disbelief. "You're sure it was him?" He nodded and pulled out his phone. After a few taps, he turned the screen toward her. A photo, slightly blurry, but clearly Julien exiting the elevator with a striking brunette on his arm. Camille brought her hand to her lips. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. The image burned into her memory. There it was. Proof. A fracture line in her reality becoming a full break. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, voice unsteady but free of accusation. Marco's expression shifted with guilt. "My mom, she works housekeeping at the Halston. They treated her badly a while back. She's also a big admirer of yours. She volunteers at one of the shelters you fund. When I realized what I'd seen, I couldn't keep quiet. You deserve to know." He hesitated, then added, "The woman's name, she said it out loud once. Sabrina Devereaux." Camille closed her eyes. The name echoed in her ears like a warning bell. A storm of betrayal and disbelief welled inside her, followed swiftly by a protective fire for the child growing within her. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was existential. Her baby's world, once envisioned in pastels and lullabies, now felt built on cracked marble. She took a steadying breath. "Thank you for telling me. I know this wasn't easy." Marco gave a small nod, visibly relieved. "I just hope you can do something about it. You really seem like someone who deserves better." Camille reached into her purse and pulled out a discreet envelope. She slid it across the table to him without a word. "I appreciate your honesty. Please, take this," Camille said softly, sliding the envelope across the table. Marco hesitated, his hand hovering over it, clearly torn. But at her gentle insistence, he accepted it with a small, grateful nod. Rising from the booth, he adjusted his cap and turned to go. Camille lightly touched his arm. "You've done something important today. Thank you." Outside, the city pulsed with life. Cars honking, commuters weaving through crosswalks, neon signs blinking above cafes and corner stores. Yet for Camille, the noise felt distant, almost surreal, drowned out by the emotional storm thundering in her chest. It felt like walking underwater, her steps slow, her breath shallow, as if grief had become gravity. Each step back toward the street felt heavier than the last. The image of Julien with another woman, so bold, so unapologetic, looped in her mind like a broken film reel. But amidst the heartbreak, a spark of defiance flared. She was Camille Roth, daughter of Richard Whittaker. She had grown up navigating boardrooms, not just ballrooms. She thought of the baby growing inside her, of her father's legacy, and her own influence through the Whittaker Foundation. I won't fall apart, she told herself. The pain would not paralyze her, not when she had more than herself to protect. No. She would gather proof, plan carefully, and protect what mattered. The morning after her discreet meeting with Marco Villanueva, Camille scheduled an appointment with her father's trusted attorney, Margaret Cho. Margaret, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her late 50s, had advised the Whitaker family for decades. She welcomed Camille into a discreet, wood-paneled law office just off Michigan Avenue. "Camille, sweetheart, come in," Margaret said, concern softening her normally firm tone. Once the door was shut, Camille opened her phone and handed it over. Margaret tapped through the grainy images in silence. Her expression hardened. "This is serious," she said at last. "An affair, particularly while you're pregnant, could lead to significant legal leverage." Camille's hands folded in her lap. "Julian made promises. To me, to our child. He's broken them. I'm not rushing toward divorce, Margaret. I just need to know where I stand." Her voice wavered only slightly, but her eyes told the truth. They were the eyes of a woman steeling herself for battle. Margaret nodded, already pulling documents from her leather briefcase. "Your prenuptial agreement has clauses that trigger in cases of infidelity, abuse, or desertion. We'll need more evidence, transaction records, communications, confirmed sightings. But if it holds up, we can protect your financial rights and your child's future." She paused. "These proceedings can get ugly. Are you ready for that?" Camille's jaw set. "I'm ready to protect my child. I'm not out to destroy Julian, but I won't let him or her dismantle what we've built." In her heart, fear mingled with fury. She would not allow her baby to inherit the consequences of betrayal. Margaret gave her hand a firm, reassuring squeeze. "Then we proceed quietly. Start gathering anything. Bank activity, messages, unusual expenses. I'll initiate a private audit to see if funds are being redirected. We'll move step by step. We'll assess the scale and decide next steps." Margaret concluded as Camille rose from her seat. She left the law office with a complex weight in her chest. Sadness, yes, but also a renewed sense of purpose. The sting of betrayal twisted in her gut, but the slow burn of determination steadied her stride. She couldn't afford illusions anymore. Meanwhile, Julian remained completely unaware that his wife was methodically laying the groundwork for quiet retaliation. He was too distracted by Sabrina's insistence on traveling abroad, by Camille's sudden emotional distance at home. Their dinners, when he bothered to attend, had grown painfully quiet. He'd tried to engage her with idle conversation, but Camille met him with reserved courtesy. It wasn't coldness that unsettled him. It was the deliberate calm, more cutting than any argument. He rationalized her demeanor as fatigue, maybe stress from the pregnancy or her foundation work. Sabrina, by contrast, had grown increasingly bold. She demanded Julian accompany her to an upcoming art exhibit at her gallery, a high-profile event where she hoped to flaunt their connection publicly. Julian declined, insisting he couldn't risk the gossip columns catching wind. Sabrina pouted, the spark between them dimming into friction. The power dynamics were shifting, but Julian remained oblivious. He believed he still held control over his business, his marriage, and the affair that fed his ego. But the illusion was starting to crack. Even the strongest walls collapse when hit by betrayal and justice colliding head-on. The beginning of the end came at a charity gala Camille co-chaired for the Whitaker Women's Initiative. Held in the majestic ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel, the space shimmered with elegance. Crystal chandeliers, gold trim, and polished marble underfoot. Chicago's elite had turned out in force. Lawmakers, celebrities, major donors. Camille, radiant in a floor-length emerald gown, moved gracefully through the crowd, her smile warm and practiced. Inside, however, she was steel. She caught sight of her father, Richard Whitaker, calmly sipping a martini near the auction displays. He offered her a discreet nod of encouragement. Then Julian arrived, an hour late, wearing his signature self-assured grin. His gaze, however, danced everywhere but toward his wife. And in a twist that made Camille's stomach clench, Sabrina Devereaux was there too. She'd finagled an invitation by donating a rare piece from her gallery to the auction. Dressed in liquid silver, Sabrina drew attention like a magnet. Her beauty lit up the room, but the weight of her presence filled it with static. Camille's skin tingled when their eyes met. She inhaled deeply, determined not to let emotion take the wheel. but murmurs soon rippled through the ballroom, subtle, then louder. Guests had begun noticing the glances Julian and Sabrina were exchanging. Far too close for two people who were supposedly mere acquaintances. Camille carried on her hostess duties, though every passing whisper sliced like a fresh wound. To make matters worse, Sabrina seemed intent on parading her familiarity with Julian, standing far too near him at the bar, laughing just a bit too loud. Natalie Price, who had been asked to assist with logistics that evening, picked up on the undercurrent. She approached Camille quietly, offering a light touch on her arm. "I'm here if you need anything," she whispered. Camille managed a polite but stiff smile, then turned her focus back to the event. When the time came for the evening's featured speech, she stepped onto the stage to speak about women's empowerment and the Foundation's ongoing mission. Her delivery was poised, her voice steady, but each sentence about safety, dignity, and respect for women landed like a personal rebuke, directed toward the one man who should have stood by her. Every word she spoke felt like she was stitching her own wound shut, one syllable at a time. The pain didn't crack her voice, it carved it into steel. In the middle of her remarks, her eyes drifted across the ballroom and caught sight of Julian and Sabrina whispering in a dark corner. The sight ignited something sharp inside her. Still, she pressed on, finishing her speech to a wave of enthusiastic applause. She stepped off the stage, hoping to find a moment to collect herself backstage. But before she could retreat, Sabrina brushed by her, elbowing her belly in the process. Whether it was intentional or not, Camille gasped from the sharp jolt of pain. Julian rushed over, but to her shock, it wasn't to help her. "Camille, watch where you're going," he snapped. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Sabrina stood behind him, a smug smirk twisting her lips. Tears welled in Camille's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "My stomach," she choked out, unable to finish the sentence as humiliation crushed her chest. Cameras clicked, conversations froze. It felt like time fractured, each second stretching into eternity under the glare of 100 eyes. In that moment, Julian Roth's carefully polished image cracked, right there under the gleaming chandeliers and the scrutiny of Chicago's most powerful. The illusion of their perfect marriage began to crumble, and something far more volatile crept into the void. In the aftermath, Camille slipped away from the stage, heart thundering. She clutched her belly, fear for her baby rising fast as her composure crumbled. She couldn't breathe. It felt like the walls of the ballroom were closing in. She aimed for the side corridor that led to the hotel's front lobby, needing space to breathe. But before she could reach the ornate double doors, heavy footsteps echoed behind her. She turned to find Julian storming toward her, fury etched across his face. Guests loitered nearby, some inching closer, unsure whether to step in. "What was that back there?" he hissed, voice low but biting. Camille's shock erupted into anger. "That?" she snapped. "That was me giving a speech to raise money for abused and homeless women, while you were busy entertaining her. And now you blame me?" He grabbed her arm roughly. "Keep your voice down," he warned, his grip tight. "You're making a scene." But Camille yanked her arm free, ignoring the sting of his fingers. "You're the one making a scene," Camille shot back, her voice trembling, part pain, part fury. "How dare you show up with her?" Julian glanced around, trying to quiet her. "We're in public, Camille. Don't do this here." Before she could answer, another figure inserted herself into the confrontation. Sabrina Devereaux, floating forward with the smug confidence of someone who thought she belonged. "Julian, darling, is everything all right?" she cooed, though her smirk betrayed how much she was enjoying Camille's anguish. Camille's glare cut through her. Tears welled in her eyes, but she willed them not to fall. "You have no right to call him that." "Not in front of me," she said, voice firm with outrage. The words trembled with restraint, each syllable edged in shattered pride. Around them, guests edged closer, forming a loose circle. Phones were subtly lifted, tucked behind clutches or hidden at their sides. The confrontation had turned into an unspoken performance. A heavy hush settled over the marble-clad lobby. Richard Whittaker appeared at the back of the crowd, his expression twisted in horror as he tried to push through to his daughter. Feeling the pressure mount, Julian snapped. "Stop acting like the victim, Camille. You have no idea the kind of pressure I'm under. The deals I'm negotiating. Sabrina is..." Whatever justification he was about to offer disappeared into a red haze of fury. Camille, stunned by the weight of his betrayal, lashed back. I do understand. I understand you're a liar and a cheater. That was the moment something inside Julian fractured. With no warning, his hand lashed out, striking Camille's cheek in a swift, brutal slap. The sound cracked through the air like lightning. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Camera shutters clicked in a flurry as the moment froze in time. Julian Roth, caught mid-assault under the blinding lights of a hotel lobby. The echo of that slap would reverberate through every corner of her memory. Camille staggered, her hand flying to her burning face. The world slowed, narrowed to that single act of horror. Sabrina's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. Richard finally broke through the circle of spectators. His voice roared across the lobby in a guttural cry of disbelief. In that single act, Julian Roth destroyed whatever remained of his golden reputation and thrust Camille into a space of heartbreak and fury she never imagined. For a breathless moment, no one moved. The crystal chandeliers overhead seemed frozen in shock, casting glittering reflections on the marble floor. Camille's cheek throbbed, her vision blurred. Her entire world had been reduced to a point of impact. Her hands instinctively cradled her stomach. The baby, her mind screamed. Then Richard was there, rushing forward. Richard shoved Julian aside, fury in his voice echoing through the marble foyer. Have you lost your damn mind? That's my daughter. You worthless excuse for a man. The crowd parted. Some rushed to Camille's side, others stood frozen, torn between helping and continuing to film what had become a full-blown public scandal. A nearby security guard hovered, clearly unsure whether to intervene in what had begun as a domestic scene, but escalated into a media disaster. Julian, his face twisted in a mix of rage and disbelief, finally grasped the gravity of what he had done. His chest heaved, adrenaline still flooding his system. She provoked me, he stammered, but the words sounded empty, pathetic amid the hush of horror surrounding him. Camille took a shaky breath, her hand still pressed against her stinging cheek. She looked him in the eye. There was no fear left, only an icy stillness he had never seen before. You shit me. Your pregnant wife, she said, each word cutting like glass. You've crossed a line, and no apology will ever erase it. Sabrina, wide-eyed and suddenly sobered, quietly slipped backward, clearly no longer interested in being near the mess she helped create. Richard turned his rage on her. And you, whoever you are, don't you dare go near my daughter again, he barked. Sabrina clutched her bag and disappeared into the crowd. The guests made way for her like water splitting from a ship's bow. Before Julian could react further, Richard turned to the security guard. Call an ambulance. My daughter is pregnant. The guard snapped to attention, moving quickly. But Camille, though barely keeping it together, shook her head. I don't need an ambulance, she said, voice trembling but firm. I just need to get away from him. Richard wrapped a steadying arm around her and led her toward the exit. Outside, the paparazzi had already gathered, drawn by the noise, the whispers, the energy. As Camille stepped into the night, camera flashes exploded around her, capturing every tear-streaked expression, every fragile step. Richard shielded her as best he could, guiding her to the waiting limousine. Julian stumbled after them, desperate to regain control. Camille, wait, don't walk away, let's just talk. She turned, her face pale but her glare seething with contempt. Don't you dare come near me. Her voice carried the cold finality of a slammed vault door. She slid into the back of the limousine. Richard followed. The door shut with a thud, and the car sped off into the neon-lit Chicago night. Julian stood alone, dazed, the camera flashes still bursting like fireworks. Within minutes, tabloids and social media would erupt with headlines. Billionaire Julian Roth slaps pregnant wife at charity gala, mistress involved. Any trace of public sympathy or uncertainty would be buried beneath the avalanche of condemnation. And for Camille, one silent promise rang out in her soul. He will never hurt me or my child again. 2 days after the catastrophic scene at the gala, Camille remained tucked away in her father's penthouse high above the Chicago skyline. Richard Whittaker had deployed a full private security team to guard against the barrage of media attention. Camille was holed up in a quiet bedroom with panoramic windows overlooking Grant Park. The city sparkled beyond the glass, but inside, her heart churned with grief and anger. Margaret Cho had arrived earlier that evening, her arms full of legal folders and her expression unwavering. Richard was pushing to press assault charges against Julian, or at the very least file a restraining order. Camille, still emotionally raw, hadn't decided. She was trapped in a storm of betrayal and heartbreak that refused to settle. Every breath felt like treading water. She could hardly recognize the woman she had been just days before, the polished socialite, the glowing mother-to-be. Now there was only a burning question echoing in her mind. How much of her life had been a lie? As Margaret conferred with Richard in the adjoining living room, Camille's phone buzzed. An unknown number again. Warily, she answered. "Mrs. Roth, Camille, it's Alyssa. Alyssa Hunter." I'm so sorry," the voice said, cracking with tension. "It's taken me time to build up the courage to call, but there's something you need to know." Camille's chest tightened. "Alyssa, please, just tell me. I've worked for Julian for years. I stayed loyal because, well, he used to treat me with some decency. But after what happened," she paused, voice shaking. "I can't keep this quiet anymore. I found a chain of emails and files on his computer about Sabrina. She's not just some mistress." Camille's breath caught. "She's been siphoning money, laundering it through offshore accounts. She pretends to run a European gallery, but it's all a front. She convinced Julian to redirect funds from Roth Dynamics' philanthropic division, supposedly to invest in overseas expansions, but it's all a lie." Camille pressed her hand to her mouth. "Are you absolutely sure?" "Positive," Alyssa said. "The transfers are massive, and they trace back to fake shell companies. She's been using his own charitable arm to launder money. I honestly think he was too blinded by infatuation to realize what she was doing." Camille stood slowly, pacing the room, her legs trembling. The very institution she had helped fund and protect, now twisted into a vessel for fraud. Camille instinctively reached for her stomach, a protective gesture. Her heart pounded. "This is bigger than infidelity," she whispered. Alyssa continued. "I've already sent the evidence to Margaret Cho. It's all there. Bank records, emails, flagged transactions, and there's more. I overheard Julian on a call with Sabrina last night. He was furious, blaming her for the PR nightmare, and she threatened him. Said if he tried to cut ties, she'd expose everything." Camille closed her eyes. Blackmail, financial crimes, betrayal wrapped in manipulation. The deception had layers, each one more poisonous than the last. "Alyssa, thank you," she said quietly. "You did the right thing." After ending the call, Camille summoned Margaret. The attorney listened in silence, her expression darkening. "This changes everything," Margaret said, voice sharp with purpose. "Julian's not just facing domestic assault charges anymore. He could be implicated in criminal financial misconduct. Sabrina too," Margaret said gravely. "If you file for divorce, we can use this evidence to secure a substantial settlement and protect your father's name from this scandal." Camille felt a complicated swirl of emotions, anxiety, relief, and something else, a fierce, clear-eyed resolve. It was no longer just about her heartbreak. It was about justice for herself, her unborn child, and the legacy of the Whitaker family name. Julian might have obliterated their marriage with betrayal and violence, but she now held a powerful card, proof of deeper criminal wrongdoing. And it was up to her to decide how to use it. Inside his own penthouse across the city, Julian Roth paced like a caged predator. The fallout from the charity gala had detonated his pristine image in record time. Roth Dynamics stock had plunged. The board was in a panic. His phone lit up hourly with missed calls from executives, reporters, even his own mother. He ignored them all. The only person he'd spoken to was Sabrina Devereaux, who was now demanding a sizable payout to keep quiet. Their last phone call had been vicious. "You don't get to walk away from me, Julian," she had hissed. "If I go down, I'll drag you with me. I have the records, every wire transfer." He'd screamed back, "Don't threaten me. I can bury you." But even as he said it, he knew how weak it sounded. He was spiraling, and Sabrina knew it. The woman he once believed was an escape had turned into his most dangerous liability. She had played him like a fiddle, and now the price was his very empire. She had manipulated him from the start, stroking his ego while lining her own pockets. Now she wanted hush money, far more than he could shift around discreetly without raising red flags at Roth Dynamics. Alone in his wrecked office, Julian slammed a fist onto his desk. Papers and files flew. including a tabloid headline screaming across the page, "Billionaire Roth's violent outburst caught on camera, pregnant wife assaulted in public." The bold print made his stomach turn. Beneath it, the photo of his hand mid-slap, frozen forever. In a surge of desperation, he dialed Camille's old number. It went straight to voicemail. He tried Richard Whitaker's line, also unanswered. Even Alyssa Hunter had abandoned him. The silence felt suffocating. Each unanswered call was a stone sealing him deeper into his self-made tomb. In the quiet hallways of Roth Dynamics, his empire no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a tomb. He collapsed into a chair, pouring himself a heavy glass of scotch despite the early hour. He had never meant to hurt Camille. He told himself that. A lie repeated too often, it had begun to sound like truth. But the echo of her gasp, the flash of her stunned face, haunted him. That it was a moment of rage, unlike him, not who he really was. But the guilt gnawed at him, burrowed into his thoughts, poisoning his sleep with visions of losing it all: his company, his child, his reputation. A chime sounded. New email. He picked up his phone with trembling hands. From Margaret Cho, subject, legal proceedings. Julian opened the message. As he read the cold, formal language, the blood drained from his face. Camille was seeking a protective order on grounds of domestic violence and an immediate freeze on specific Roth Dynamics assets pending divorce proceedings. The letter also hinted at potential criminal investigations into financial misconduct. The final line chilled Julian to the bone. "We advise you to respond within 72 hours to avoid an escalated legal approach." His vision swam. The words blurred, like cold steel pressing against his temples. Every shred of confidence unraveled in a single sentence. They knew everything. The money laundering, his entanglement with Sabrina. The web he'd allowed to spin around him had finally unraveled. Panic, unlike anything he'd ever felt, gripped his chest. He wanted to lash out, to blame someone, anyone. But deep down, he understood this chaos was his own doing. He sank to his knees by the window, staring at the city below, the empire he had built now bearing the weight of his own betrayal. Staring at the sprawling skyline of Chicago, the city he once thought he ruled, Julian Roth realized his reckoning had arrived. And unless he moved fast, the man once celebrated as a titan of industry would be reduced to rubble by the fire he had ignited. Camille, by contrast, sat in her father's penthouse with an odd, quiet calm washing over her. Margaret Cho had just left after laying out the next steps. She was filing for an emergency protective order, one that would legally prevent Julian from approaching Camille or the unborn child. Divorce papers were being drafted, citing domestic violence and adultery. A financial investigation into Roth Dynamics and its dealings with Sabrina Devereaux had officially commenced. Camille sat by the large bay window, her palm resting gently on her belly. The weight in her belly was no longer just life, it was her purpose. Each heartbeat matched her resolve to build a new future. Free of fear and filled with strength. She was no longer the woman clinging to a fragile marriage. She had looked betrayal in the eye and endured it. Now her resolve burned steady and bright. A soft knock pulled her attention. Richard stepped in, his typically composed face lined with concern. "How are you feeling?" he asked gently. Camille gave a faint smile. "Better than I expected. The bruises are healing, and the baby's fine. Doctor said everything looks good." Hearing the doctor's reassurance was like a balm to her soul, proof that even after the darkest storm, beginnings could be tender. Richard exhaled. "I'm relieved. I know this. This must be a lot." She nodded, her eyes tracing the skyline. "I never imagined this, that I'd marry someone who'd betray me like that, hit me. But I can't sit in that pain. I have to move forward. For the baby. For myself." Richard hesitated, then added, "I called a few friends in the DA's office. If Julian's finances trace back to anything illegal, he may face criminal charges. And if he tries to paint this as anything but abuse, we have more than a dozen witness accounts from the gala." Camille's eyes lit with a quiet flicker of relief. Justice, for the first time, felt within reach, not just for her, but for every risk she was taking now. "Thank you, Dad. I'm grateful you're with me through this. It still feels unreal, like everything fell apart overnight." He gently wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You're stronger than you think, Camille. You'll get through this." She leaned into him, remembering a time when Julian had once made her laugh. That man was gone now, just a ghost of a naive memory. She exhaled, feeling the tension of days unravel from her shoulders as she embraced the support she had earned, not as a wife, but as her own person. Later that day, she began to put her life back in order. She wrote personal letters to a few close friends, explaining that she was safe, but needed time and distance. She also made quiet calls to the boards and committees she had once led, stepping back from several high-profile philanthropic projects. When Camille reached out to the women's shelter she co-chaired, the staff there responded with overwhelming support, offering resources, protection, and anything she might need. Their warmth, their unwavering voices through the receiver, anchored her in a moment that might have otherwise swallowed her whole. In those small actions, Camille began to rediscover a sense of direction. She was no longer Julian Roth's wife. That identity had crumbled. She was a mother-to-be, a philanthropist, a woman taking her dignity back, step by step. Each gesture, each phone call, each minute spent holding her breath and pushing forward stitched together a patchwork of resilience. Each rung she climbed out of despair was forged from her own willpower, and deep down she knew a final confrontation with Julian loomed. But she no longer feared it. The man who tried to break her was about to discover that the fiercest storms are survived by those who refuse to be swept away. Exactly 48 hours after Margaret Cho's formal notice hit his inbox, Julian Roth arrived at Richard Whittaker's penthouse, two newly retained attorneys in tow. The doorman watched his approach warily, well aware of the scandal that had captivated Chicago. But since the meeting had been arranged through Margaret Cho's office, Julian was allowed upstairs. Inside the elegant living room, softened by warm lamplight and heavy drapes, Camille sat on a velvet couch, serene, composed, and visibly pregnant. Her hands rested gently on her belly, not just protectively but with a quiet pride. The fading mark on her cheek was now a pale yellow, but the memory of what he'd done remained vivid in her expression. Margaret Cho, Richard, and Camille were already seated, awaiting the arrival. Julian's lawyers offered stiff greetings. Tension thickened the air like fog. Margaret's tone was clipped and formal as she gestured to the dining table, which was lined with documents. "We're here to finalize terms of the protective order, address the divorce proceedings, and begin discussions on the financial misconduct charges." Julian's jaw tensed. "Allegations," he muttered coldly. "Not proof?" Margaret opened a folder. These documents were retrieved from Roth Dynamics' financial accounts, showing repeated transfers to shell corporations registered to Sabrina Devereaux. "We also have her Cayman Island bank records tracing the flow of funds." Julian's face darkened. "She told me it was for expansion opportunities in Europe. I was misled." Camille finally spoke. Her voice was composed, but each word cut clean and sharp. "And so you used charitable funds to impress her? Money meant for shelters and schools, for real good?" The sting in her voice wasn't just from betrayal. It was the echo of every sleepless night, every lonely ultrasound, every public humiliation endured in silence. Julian looked at her, eyes full of something that resembled remorse. "Camille, you have to believe me." "I never meant to hurt you," Julian murmured. Camille stared back, unwavering. "And yet, you did." His lawyers, eager to seize control of the spiraling situation, stepped in. "We propose a private settlement, along with a gag order. In return, Mr. Roth will cede a portion of his assets." Camille raised a hand. Her voice was steady. "No." The room stilled. "You lost the right to silence this. I've already filed for divorce, and I won't be part of some cover-up. Women, especially pregnant women, need to see that abusers don't get to hide behind money." Her voice didn't crack. It rose, firm, composed, a voice shaped by pain but sharpened by purpose. Julian's shoulders sagged. The fight had drained from his face. He looked hollow. "So this is it?" he asked. Camille drew in a breath, bracing herself. "There's one more thing." Her voice softened but sharpened in intensity. "You accused me of provoking you. You tried to justify hitting me, but I have a secret, one that changes everything." She looked to Richard, who gave a quiet nod. A hush fell over the room. Camille squared her shoulders. "The baby I'm carrying has a medical condition. I found out recently. It'll need specialized care, maybe surgeries. It won't be easy." She paused, trembling, but not from fear, from the sheer weight of everything left unsaid. Tears slid down her cheeks. "And all the money you wasted on Sabrina? That could have helped. That should have helped." You didn't just betray me, Julian. You betrayed your child's chance at a healthy life. Julian blanched, his eyes darting to her belly. I didn't know, he whispered, his voice wrecked with disbelief. He stumbled back slightly, the revelation hitting harder than anything Margaret could have filed in court. Silence reigned. Margaret's cold stare said it all. Whatever thin thread of sympathy might have existed for him in court, it had now snapped entirely. And for Camille, a deep, powerful sense of closure settled into her chest. Not triumph, not vindication, just the quiet relief of truth, finally, undeniably laid bare. Her pain, her child's challenge, Julian's greed, it had all come to light. And no matter what followed, she had reclaimed the truth he tried so desperately to bury. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was swift and unforgiving. Camille's legal team, armed with every shred of evidence Alyssa Hunter had provided, demonstrated Julian's direct involvement in Sabrina's fraudulent schemes. Simultaneously, the district attorney's office launched a formal investigation into potential criminal conduct. Sabrina Devereaux, realizing the walls were closing in, fled the country. Julian Roth was left to face the reckoning alone. The board of Roth Dynamics convened an emergency vote and ousted him as CEO. The once gleaming brand's reputation lay in ruins. Its stock tanked. Civil suits loomed, including Camille's demand for damages, both for assault and the misuse of charitable funds. Every news headline, every interview Camille declined, added weight to Julian's disgrace. His downfall was public, and it was deserved. Public sympathy flooded toward the woman he had left battered and humiliated, a pregnant wife, fighting not just for herself, but for her unborn child. And through it all, Camille found light in the ruins. She pushed forward, determined to secure the best care possible for her baby. Her father's connections made that goal attainable. Her philanthropic work, paused but not forgotten, began to rebuild under new, honest leadership. She had lost a marriage, but found her voice. She had been wounded, but not broken. And that, she knew, was its own kind of victory. A coalition of pediatric specialists and compassionate donors quickly mobilized, raising funds and awareness for conditions like the one Camille's newborn would face. At the forefront of this movement stood Camille herself, channeling pain into purpose, transforming heartbreak into advocacy that resonated with parents around the globe. Richard Whittaker watched his daughter with immense pride. Gone was the quiet, carefully poised socialite. In her place now stood a woman of fierce resolve, compassion, and unmatched strength. Together, they restructured part of the Whittaker Foundation to focus entirely on pediatric care, renaming it in honor of Camille's unborn son. On a brisk October morning, Camille gave birth to a baby boy. The child required immediate intervention, but doctors remained hopeful. His prognosis, while complex, offered optimism. Margaret Cho visited Camille at the hospital that same week, hand-delivering a final set of papers that officially concluded the divorce. A judge had ruled in Camille's favor. She received full custody. Julian's personal assets were frozen pending the outcome of the criminal probe. Standing beside the transparent bassinet, Camille signed her name, sealing not just legal freedom, but emotional liberation. When she was discharged, photographers loitered outside the hospital, but tight security kept them at bay. Camille didn't flinch. Instead of hiding behind sunglasses or bodyguards, she cradled her newborn, allowing the world to see her strength, grace, and calm. The headlines read, "Camille Roth leaves hospital with newborn son, triumphant, after medical intervention." A stark contrast to Julian Roth's spiral. Days later, Alyssa Hunter visited Richard's penthouse. She came bearing soft apologies for her silence, but Camille simply thanked her for ultimately stepping forward. Alyssa handed over small gifts, tokens from staff at Roth Dynamics who had, by then, abandoned Julian's toxic leadership. The gesture gave Camille a rare sense of closure. Julian Roth, meanwhile, faced a long reckoning. Court proceedings loomed, his finances were in tatters. And Helena Devereaux? She never returned. She disappeared after draining him of everything useful. The man once hailed as a visionary now became a cautionary tale, his name spoken only in hushed tones of scandal and downfall. Camille, in contrast, stepped forward. With her son in her arms and her father by her side, she embraced this new life. A mother, an advocate, a survivor. Her scars weren't shameful, they were proof. Of endurance. Of rebirth. She was no longer a victim, she was a warrior. A woman who had rewritten her narrative. and who vowed her son's life would be built on integrity, love, and truth. And so the story of Julian Roth and Camille Whitaker finds its conclusion, a tale shaped by betrayal, ambition, and the high cost of unchecked ego. But from the wreckage of that fractured marriage rose a force stronger than wealth or fame, a mother forging a new path with clarity and purpose. Camille's quiet strength became a beacon, a message to all. True power lies in standing tall against abuse, rising above ruin, and protecting the most vulnerable. As Julian faces the fallout of his own destruction, Camille walks on, with courage born of sorrow and the fierce, unwavering love of a mother. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you powerful stories of redemption, strength, and the triumph of the human spirit. Thank you for watching. A hush swept through the gilded ballroom of the Langford Grand in Singapore, every gaze fixed on the woman in scarlet. Her hand still hovered in the air, her face locked in a mask of smug triumph. The gentle, pregnant wife of billionaire magnate Adrian Knight stumbled back, one hand protectively cradling her rounded belly. The mark of a slap bloomed red on her cheek, while the city's elite watched, breathless, as the mistress, brazen and unapologetic, claimed her victory. But the true scandal wasn't the public disgrace or the splintering of a perfect marriage. The real bombshell lay hidden deep inside her womb, a secret waiting to be exposed, not by words, but by the frantic, insistent beat of a tiny, unborn heart. Amelia Knight had once believed her life was a fairy tale at 27. She was the adored wife of Adrian Knight, a man whose name commanded power across Southeast Asia's tech industry. Their whirlwind romance was legendary. A modest art curator swept into one of Singapore's most powerful families. Adrian was her world, charismatic, protective, impossibly attentive. He had given her a life beyond her dreams. A soaring penthouse overlooking Marina Bay, closets lined with custom gowns from designers like Tan, Wu, and a love she thought unshakable, as solid as the old stones of the Buddha Tooth relic temple nearby. Now, 6 months pregnant with their first child, a boy, Amelia felt her world was finally complete. The nursery was a haven of soft creams and powder blues, filled with handcrafted toys and imported furniture. Adrian had been overjoyed, throwing extravagant parties to announce the heir to the Knight legacy. He would rest his hand on her belly, eyes glowing with a happiness that seemed to mirror hers. "Our legacy, my love," he would murmur, voice thick with feeling. "Everything I do for you and for him." But lately, hairline cracks had begun to splinter the flawless veneer of their life. Adrian worked later and later. His calls were more frequent, his tone low and secretive. He blamed it on a new merger, a ruthless acquisition needing his absolute focus. Trusting and devoted, Amelia accepted every excuse. She would wait, while gourmet dinners went cold on the polished mahogany table, her own reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows her only companion. The rumors began as a whisper, tangled in the clink of champagne flutes at charity auctions. A name, Selena, spoken in envious, hushed voices by women dripping in diamonds. Amelia ignored it. Singapore's social circle was a nest of vipers, and she, the nobody who had won its most eligible bachelor, was the prime target. Selena, Amelia would soon discover, was Selena Chan, ruthlessly driven, scandalously bold, a blast from Adrian's university past. Where Amelia radiated quiet elegance, Selena was wildfire. Her laughter was loud, her dresses daring, her ambition an open secret. She had just returned to Singapore after a few years in Hong Kong, and her reappearance in their world struck like a lightning bolt. The first time Amelia felt a genuine shiver of unease was at the annual Singapore Innovators Gala, held at the lavish Langford Grand. Adrian, set to receive the evening's highest honor, was strangely distracted the whole night, his eyes darting toward the entrance, his hand gripping hers a little too firmly. And then Selena appeared. She wore a scarlet dress that hugged her curves like it had been poured over her skin, an audacious splash of color in a sea of muted pastels and classic blacks. She moved through the guests with the sleek, predatory grace of a panther, her eyes locked on Adrian from across the ballroom. Amelia caught the flicker in her husband's gaze, not just recognition, but something older, tangled, a memory she was never meant to share. All night, she watched as Selena skillfully cornered Adrian, her fingers resting just a beat too long on his arm, her laughter ringing out, sharper and too familiar. Adrian, usually so composed, seemed rattled, so out of character it set Amelia's nerves on edge. "She's just an old friend, darling," he whispered later that night, voice as smooth as silk. "A little much, but harmless." He pulled her close, pressing his lips to hers, and for a heartbeat, the warmth of his touch dulled her dread. She wanted to believe him. To doubt Adrian was to dismantle the bedrock of her life. But the seeds were planted. A week later, she found a receipt tucked inside his laptop bag, a grand bouquet of black roses. A flower Amelia loathed but knew was Selena's favorite. He brushed it off as a corporate gift. Then came the late-night text that buzzed on his phone. "Thinking of you." He deleted it before she could read the rest. His explanations grew more complicated. The crack between them widened into an aching void. Their penthouse, once her dream come true, now felt like a gilded prison. Her friends, mostly wives of Adrian's business partners, murmured sympathy but offered nothing real. They knew how this world worked. Silent acceptance, eyes politely averted. But Amelia's heart, naive and stubborn, couldn't bend to that. For her, love was not a contract or a compromise. It was sacred, absolute. And now her pregnancy, once her greatest source of hope, turned into a gnawing worry. She felt a primal urge to shield her unborn son, not just from gossip, but from the growing darkness inside their home. She tried to reach Adrian, to break through the barrier he'd so carefully built. He was meticulously building walls she could no longer climb. "Is everything okay, Adrian?" Amelia asked one evening, her hand resting gently on his arm as he stared out at the city skyline. "You seem so far away." He turned to her, his face a careful mask of warmth. "Just work stress, my love. This deal is draining, but once it's done, it'll be just the three of us. I promise." He tilted her chin, pressing a kiss to her lips, a hollow gesture that no longer touched his eyes. Amelia knew then, with a cold certainty that chilled her to the bone, that he was lying. This wasn't about business. The real hostile takeover was happening inside her own home. And the threat wasn't another corporation. It was a woman in scarlet who smelled of black roses and secrets. The fairy tale was over. Amelia was trapped, pregnant, alone, and standing on the edge of a truth too painful to grasp. The breaking point came in the form of an embossed cream invitation. Knight Enterprises was celebrating its 50th anniversary with a grand gala. It would be the social event of the year, a glittering tribute to the family's enduring empire. For Amelia, it felt less like a celebration and more like the final stage for her unraveling marriage. In the weeks leading up to the ball, Adrian was a storm of energy, yet sharper and oddly cheerful. His mood was almost boyish. He surprised Amelia with a breathtaking midnight blue gown from a Parisian designer and a sapphire necklace the color of Marina Bay at dusk. "You'll be the most beautiful woman there," he said, his voice drenched in a sincerity she hadn't heard in months. "The mother of my son, the queen of my heart." For a fleeting, desperate moment, Amelia let herself believe him. Maybe the affair, the rumors, the sleepless nights, maybe they were a passing madness. Maybe this night would prove to the world and to her that she was the only one who truly mattered. She pushed her dread deep down, focusing instead on her baby's quiet kicks, a secret conversation between mother and child telling her to hold on. On the night of the gala, the Langford Grand's ballroom was transformed into an enchanted forest straight out of an old Singaporean folk tale. Thousands of orchids draped from the ceiling, the air rich with the scent of jasmine and the low murmur of the city's elite mingling. Amelia, on Adrian's arm, was the picture of calm grace. The deep blue of her gown glowed against her skin. Her pregnancy and the night sapphires at her throat shimmered with every graceful turn of her head. She smiled, she mingled. She played the role of the flawless billionaire's wife, while a cold knot of dread coiled tighter in her belly. She knew Selena would be there. Inside, exhaustion clawed at her ribs. Nights of restless sleep, of lying awake beside Adrian's cold side of the bed, had left her nerves raw. Every perfect smile tonight was pinned over the tremor in her hands and the nauseating fear that maybe, just maybe, she was too weak to face the truth. And yet she smiled, determined to hold the illusion together a little longer. It was unavoidable, and sure enough, she spotted her by the champagne fountain. But tonight, Selena wasn't in her usual bold red. She wore a shocking white gown, almost bridal in its defiance. The dress was intentional, a clear provocation. Selena's eyes found Amelia's across the room, and she offered a slow, deliberate smile that dripped with mockery. Adrian stiffened at her side. "Ignore her," he murmured, his grip on Amelia's arm tightening, almost possessive. "Tonight is about us." But Selena refused to be ignored. As the night dragged on, she was everywhere. If Amelia stepped out onto the terrace for air, Selena appeared moments later, her laughter slicing through the night like a blade. If Amelia paused to greet an acquaintance, Selena would drift past, leaving behind the sickly sweet trail of her black rose perfume. It was a meticulous assault on Amelia's sanity, and it was working. A headache bloomed behind her eyes, fed by the whispered doubts she had locked away for months. She forced herself to stand tall, telling herself she could not break here. Not tonight, not in front of this crowd waiting to feed on her weakness. Her carefully practiced poise began to crack. The breaking point arrived just after the evening's centerpiece speeches. Adrian had just given a heartfelt tribute to his family and the future of Knight Enterprises, ending with a toast. "To my beautiful wife, Amelia, and to our son, who will one day carry this legacy forward." Applause thundered through the hall. Beaming, Adrian turned and kissed her. An orchestrated show of devotion meant to seal their image as the golden couple. And in that fragile instant of staged perfection, Selena struck. She glided toward their table, her white gown slicing through the murmuring guests like the prow of a ship through calm water. She didn't falter. Her eyes held no hesitation, only cold certainty. The chatter died into a hush, a collective breath drawn tight as she reached them. She stopped directly in front of Amelia, who was still seated. Adrian, caught off guard, half rose from his chair, his smile frozen in place. "Legacy?" Selena's voice was cool and razor-sharp, cutting through the silence. "Adrian, you really are a brilliant storyteller, but you left out the main character." She turned her venom on Amelia, every word a poisoned dart. "You poor clueless little thing, did you truly believe it all? The fairy tale, the loyal husband, the perfect family?" Amelia sat frozen, her heartbeat a wild trapped bird in her chest. "What are you saying?" she whispered, her voice so soft it almost vanished in the hush. "What am I saying?" Selena's voice rose, sharp and merciless, echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "I'm saying the child you're carrying isn't the only Knight heir. I'm saying that every single night Adrian claimed he was working late, he was in my bed." A wave of gasps rippled through the ballroom. Guests turned openly now, some raising their phones to secretly record the scandal playing out live. Adrian finally found his voice. "Selena, that's enough. You're embarrassing yourself." "Embarrassing myself?" she shrieked, her polished mask cracking to reveal the raw rage underneath. "You're the liar here. You promised me, Adrian. You promised you'd leave her." She swung her furious gaze back to Amelia, her eyes a venomous mix of pity and disdain. "He was never going to leave me. This," she pointed a trembling finger at Amelia's belly, "was just a pretty excuse, a perfect heir for the world to see. But his heart, his passion, that's always been mine." The room tilted under Amelia's feet. The glittering faces of guests warped into a grotesque sea of open mouths and greedy eyes. She looked at Adrian, begging him without words to deny it, to fight for her, but he just stood frozen, pale, eyes flicking helplessly between the two women like a cornered animal. His silence was all the confession she needed. Tears burned hot and humiliating as they pooled in Amelia's eyes. A raw thought scraped through her fog of shame. How could I be so weak, so blind? How can I protect my child if I can't even protect myself? But beneath the shame rose something more powerful, the fierce instinct to protect her child from this public nightmare. She pushed against the table, trying to stand, her voice breaking. "Please, stop." But Selena smelled weakness and lunged for the kill. "You think you've won?" Her words dripped with cruelty. "You think this baby locks in your crown? You're nothing, nothing but an incubator, a vessel." Then, in a flash of motion that startled even her, Selena leaned forward and swung her hand. Crack! The slap rang out, sharp and vicious, slicing through the suffocating silence. Amelia's head snapped sideways from the force, pain bursting across her cheek. For a heartbeat, the world fell away. Only the burn of the slap and the collective, horrified gasp of the room existed. Selena Chan, the mistress, had just struck the pregnant wife of Adrian Knight in front of the entire elite of Singapore. Amelia staggered backward, one hand flying to her stinging face, while the other wrapped protectively, instinctively around her belly. The humiliation was crushing, pressing the breath from her chest. She scanned the room, staring into shock, pity, and hungry fascination. She looked at Adrian, his face a mess of horror and helplessness. And then she turned her gaze to Selina, who stood there triumphant. Her chest rose and fell in ragged breaths, her palms still stinging, hatred and triumph gleaming in her eyes. The fairy tale hadn't just ended, it had been torn apart, publicly, violently, and forever. And as a sharp, searing pain knifed through her abdomen, Amelia realized one awful truth. The slap wasn't the worst blow she'd take tonight. The real pain was only just beginning. The sound of that slap still hung in the vast ballroom, a brutal full stop to what had been a night of glittering illusion. For a single breathless moment, everyone, Adrian included, stood paralyzed. Then, reality snapped back like a whip. Amelia's mind whirled in a haze of humiliation and raw hurt. Her knees buckled as the sharp cramp deep in her belly flared, spreading in jagged waves of pain. A tiny broken gasp slipped from her lips. "My baby," she choked out, terror strangling her voice. Instinct crushed every other feeling, shame, rage, betrayal. All that mattered now was the tiny, fragile life inside her. It wasn't her husband who caught her. It was his father, Richard Knight, the formidable family patriarch who had watched from a nearby table, his face dark with simmering fury. He lunged forward, his aging but still imposing frame moving with startling speed. He grabbed Amelia's arm just as her body threatened to give out. "Bring a chair, and someone get a doctor. Now." His voice, seasoned by decades of boardrooms and power plays, cut through the stunned murmurs like a blade. Adrian snapped out of his stupor at last. "Amelia." He stumbled to her side, his expression a storm of guilt and panic. "Oh God, are you okay?" He reached for her, but she recoiled, her eyes brimming with a depth of pain he had never seen before. In that single blazing look he saw it all, the total annihilation of her trust. Across from them, Selina's victorious glow flickered. Reality crashed over her too. Striking a pregnant woman in public wasn't just scandalous. Even in the morally flexible circles of the ultra-rich, it was unforgivable. Her eyes darted to the exits, her breath catching. She had wanted to expose the lie, to push Adrian into choosing her publicly. But this was spinning beyond her control. I didn't mean," she stammered, but Richard Knight cut her down with a look colder than death. "You?" His voice dropped to a lethal growl. "You will not move an inch." He turned sharply, eyes pinning a nearby security guard. "Hold her, now." Two towering men in tailored black suits appeared instantly at Richard Knight's side. "Take Miss Chan to a private room. She does not leave until I say so." Selina's face went pale. Her mouth opened in protest, but one look at the unforgiving rage in Richard's eyes sealed her fate. Without a word, the security guards closed in, flanking her and guiding her away. Her white gown, once defiant, now looked less bridal and more like a funeral shroud. All attention turned back to Amelia. She was gasping, her breaths shallow and jagged, the cramping twisted tighter inside her. "It hurts," she sobbed, both arms wrapped protectively around her stomach, as if she could keep her son safe by sheer force of will. "Adrian, it hurts." Despite the betrayal, despite everything, instinct clawed through her panic. He was still, on some buried level, the man she had trusted to protect her. Adrian's face was ash-white as he dropped to his knees in front of her. "I'm here, Amelia. God, I'm so sorry. Just hold on, we're going to the hospital." He reached for her hand, and this time, she didn't resist. Her fingers clutched his with raw desperation. A raw thought tore through her panic. "This is my fault. I should have left sooner, should have run the moment I suspected. Maybe then my baby wouldn't be fighting for his life." The guilt curled inside her ribs like a second pain, cruel and sharp, echoing with each contraction. The Langford Grand's staff, trained for every crisis, sprang into action. A portable screen went up around their table, shielding the Knights from hundreds of greedy eyes. A medic, on standby for the gala, knelt beside Amelia within seconds. He checked her vitals, his expression tightening. "Her blood pressure's dangerously high. She's in preterm labor. We have to move her now. Mount Elizabeth is the closest top maternity ward," he announced, naming Singapore's renowned private hospital. Everything blurred for Amelia after that. She barely registered being lifted into a wheelchair, rolled down hidden corridors, and whisked through a private elevator. Anything to escape the eyes, the whispers, the pity. Each bump and jolt sent fresh pain ripping through her belly. She squeezed her eyes shut, one hand never leaving her swollen stomach, whispering her baby's name over and over. A fragile shield against the darkness closing in. Adrian sat beside her in the back of his Maybach, a broken shadow of the man he had been hours ago. The mask of the unstoppable CEO was gone. Now he was just a man terrified of losing everything, crushed by his own betrayal. He kept mumbling apologies over and over. "I'm sorry, Amelia. I'm so sorry. Please, please be okay." Amelia didn't answer. His words meant nothing. They were useless noise, a mosquito buzzing inside the hurricane tearing her world apart. The promises that had built her world were now ashes, and the man who made them had simply watched them burn. His apologies weren't for her. They were a pitiful plea from a guilty man begging to wash his own hands clean. Amelia had nothing left to give him. A terrifying wetness pooled between her legs. Panic clawed up her throat as fresh pain twisted through her abdomen. Her eyes flew open, locking onto Adrian's. "Something's wrong," she gasped. "Adrian, something's wrong with the baby." Her fear finally pierced through his fog of self-pity. He spun on the driver, voice cracking. "Faster! Drive faster, for God's sake!" As the limousine tore through the bright, indifferent streets of Singapore, the glittering skyline a blur, Amelia felt an eerie calm settle in her bones. The pain was savage, but the betrayal hurt more. That slap had been the spark, but what rang in its echo wasn't just the sound of skin on skin. It was the thunderous silence of her husband's lie, the unraveling of everything she had built her life on. Now it threatened to take the only thing that mattered. She wasn't fighting for her marriage anymore, or her name. She was fighting for her child's life. The emergency bay at Mount Elizabeth Hospital flared to life with harsh fluorescent light and brisk, purposeful chaos. A medical team, summoned by Richard Knight's clout, was ready before they arrived. Amelia barely registered being lifted from the wheelchair to a gurney. Sharp pain drew a ragged cry from her lips. Doctors and nurses closed in, a blur of calm urgency and clipped commands. Pregnant, 27 weeks, severe cramping, vaginal bleeding, post-assault, BP 160/100, tachycardic, prep maternity OR, ultrasound now, possible placental abruption, move. Adrian was shoved aside, stripped of his power, a useless bystander as strangers took control of the two lives that mattered more than his excuses. He stood numbly in the corridor, tuxedo and polished shoes absurd against the antiseptic floors, his hands still sticky with a trace of Amelia's blood from where he'd tried to calm her. He watched her disappear through swinging doors, her hands still pressed protectively to her belly, her face ghostly with terror. The doors shut with a soft, final click, leaving him alone with nothing but the crushing weight of his guilt. Inside the exam room, harsh lights glared overhead. Nurses helped Amelia out of what remained of her midnight blue gown, slicing the delicate fabric without ceremony. Pain pulsed in a cruel rhythm as a middle-aged doctor, calm but commanding, stepped into her line of sight. "Mrs. Knight, my name is Dr. Leanne. I'm the head of obstetrics tonight. We're going to take excellent care of you and your baby," Dr. Leanne said, her voice steady and warm, a calm beacon in the storm. "We need to do an ultrasound to see exactly what's happening, okay? Try to stay as still as you can." Amelia nodded weakly, silent tears sliding down her temples into her hair. Is my baby going to be all right?" she whispered. "We're doing everything possible to make sure of it," Dr. Leanne reassured her, her voice unwavering even as her eyes revealed the gravity of the moment. "Let's have a look now." The room fell into a tense hush. The ultrasound technician spread the cold gel across Amelia's belly, and the machine hummed to life. Only the soft whirring and Amelia's ragged breaths broke the silence. She fixed her eyes on the monitor, heart pounding in her ears, begging the universe for a sign, a flicker of life, a chance to hope. The technician guided the transducer across her abdomen. Shadows and shapes swirled on the screen, while Dr. Leanne's eyes narrowed in focus, her brow creased with concentration. Adrian, finally allowed into the room after what felt like an eternity, hovered in the corner, helpless, eyes locked on the monitor. "There's your baby," Dr. Leanne said softly. "He's small, but he's a fighter." A strangled sob of relief burst from Amelia's chest. He was alive. But Dr. Leanne's tone shifted. More clinical now. I do see something concerning. There's a small subchorionic hematoma, likely caused by the trauma and your elevated blood pressure. It's a bleed. That's what's causing the pain and the spotting. Adrian's voice rasped from the corner. Will he be okay? Dr. Leanne didn't spare him a glance. Her attention was only for Amelia. Our biggest risk right now is preterm labor. The shock and stress could trigger contractions. We're going to give you medication to stop them and a steroid shot to help his lungs develop, just in case. As she spoke, the technician adjusted the settings. Suddenly, a new sound filled the small room. Thump, 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 thump. Fast, desperate, alive. It was the baby's heartbeat, amplified by the machine. A frantic drumbeat, but strong and unwavering. To Amelia, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. Tears of raw relief streamed down her cheeks. It was the sound of life, of hope. Dr. Leanne smiled gently for the first time that night. A strong heartbeat. That's a very good sign. He's stressed, yes, but he's strong. Adrian stepped closer. A wave of gratitude and sheer relief washing over his drawn face. Thank God. He exhaled shakily while the technician continued, taking careful measurements, freezing images of the tiny profile, the curled fists. Dr. Leanne explained the plan. Strict bed rest, round-the-clock monitoring. Then the technician suddenly paused, zooming in on a specific spot on the screen, her brow knitting in a way that had nothing to do with the hematoma. Doctor, she said quietly, pointing at the monitor. Dr. Leanne leaned in, her practiced eyes sweeping over the area. The room went dead silent again. Only the baby's heartbeat echoed, frantic and strong. For a long moment, Dr. Leanne said nothing. She just stared, her expression shifting from professional concern to pure bewilderment. What is it? Amelia asked, her fear slicing back through her fragile relief. Is something else wrong? Dr. Leanne turned to Amelia, then to Adrian, then back to Amelia. Her face a complicated mask of confusion and something that looked suspiciously like disbelief. Run the Doppler again, she told the technician. Amplify it. The technician did as told. The familiar thump-thump filled the air, then the probe shifted slightly, just a few centimeters. Thump-thump, thump-thump, thump-thump. A second heartbeat joined the first. Distinct, separate, equally frantic, but clearly its own tiny rhythm. It was undeniable. The room that had held one heartbeat now pulsed with two. Amelia's eyes darted from the monitor to Dr. Leanne, her brain struggling to grasp what her ears knew was real. What is that? Adrian stepped closer, confusion wide in his eyes. Is that an echo? Is something wrong with the machine? Dr. Leanne slowly shook her head, her gaze locked on the flickering images. Two tiny, blinking sparks of life. She turned to Amelia, her voice barely more than a whisper. Mrs. Knight, there's nothing wrong with the machine. She inhaled deeply, as if steadying herself to say something utterly impossible. You're not carrying one baby. She lifted a trembling finger toward the screen, pointing at the two distinct sacs, the two flickering heartbeats, racing side by side. You're having twins. The words dropped into the air like a thunderclap. Stunning, impossible, defying every prior truth. Every ultrasound, done by the high society doctor handpicked by Adrian, had shown just one baby, one boy. Adrian had been at every scan, beaming at the grainy little prince they'd built their fairy tale around. A wave of dizziness crashed over Amelia. Twins. How? They'd scanned at 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 20. Always one baby, one perfect heir. And then, a darker thought seeped through the cracks of betrayal and shock, an ugly, insidious question that made her blood run cold. She turned her eyes on Adrian, who was not beaming at this miracle, but pale as death, eyes fixed on the screen, his entire body frozen. His face wasn't lit with joy. It was the look of a man watching his carefully built lie explode under the weight of the most undeniable biological truth of all. The private doctor he'd insisted on, the unwavering certainty. One boy. Her voice trembled, the horror blooming in every word. But all the other scans, Dr. Pham always said, he said it was just one. Adrian couldn't meet her eyes. He stared at the monitor, at the double heartbeat that had just torn his secret apart, and said nothing. His eyes darted wildly, searching for an exit where there was none. And in that moment, Amelia saw it all with devastating clarity. The slap, the affair, the humiliation in front of Singapore's elite. Those were just the overture. This was the real betrayal. It wasn't just infidelity. It was a lie so deep, so methodically spun, that it invaded the most sacred part of her life. Her own body. Her own children. Dr. Leanne, sensing the seismic shift in the room, spoke softly but firmly. Sometimes a twin can hide, tucked behind the other, especially if the sonographer isn't specifically checking. But at 27 weeks, it's very rare to miss. Very rare. Her carefully chosen words hung heavy in the sterile air. A quiet accusation, more damning than any shout. The 2 heartbeats thundered through the machine's speakers, no longer just proof of life, but a fierce, undeniable truth. They were the drumbeat of a secret that refused to stay buried. A truth that declared Adrian Knight hadn't just lied about a mistress, he had lied about the legacy he claimed to protect. Amelia wasn't just carrying his heir. She was carrying the secret he had twisted himself into knots to keep hidden. And thanks to the violence of his mistress, that secret had erupted into the open, turning everything to ash. The discovery of the second heartbeat didn't bring relief. It exploded like a silent bomb, destroying what was left of her broken fairy tale. The frantic rhythm of 2 tiny lives wasn't a blessing. It was proof of a monstrous, calculated betrayal. Amelia lay on the hospital bed, Dr. Leanne's words echoing, "You're having twins." She turned her gaze to Adrian, really looked at him for the first time since truth ripped the lies apart. The panic on his face was unmistakable, but underneath it she saw something colder. The trapped gleam of a king watching his carefully built kingdom burn to the ground. "You knew." Her voice was stripped raw, so cold it barely sounded like her own. It wasn't a question, it was a verdict. "You knew, and you lied." Adrian recoiled like she'd struck him across the face. "Amelia, no, how could I have known? It's a miracle. A blessing." His attempt at wonder was pitiful, a mask too thin to fool anyone. "A blessing?" Her laugh cracked on the edge of hysteria. "You stood there at every appointment with Dr. Pham, your hand-picked doctor, looking at those screens, telling me about our son, the Knight heir. Was he in on it too? Did you pay him to erase my other child? To erase our other child?" The ugly accusation sliced the air wide open. Dr. Leanne and the technician turned pointedly away, pretending to check equipment, granting them privacy that didn't exist. "That's insane," Adrian stammered, raking a hand through his perfectly styled hair, wrecking it for the first time all night. "Why would I do that? Why would I hide one of my own children?" "I don't know." Amelia's voice cracked, the raw pain finally shattering through her shock. "Maybe one's a boy and one's a girl, and you only ever wanted the boy. Maybe you have some sick, twisted reason I can't even imagine. But you knew. You weren't shocked, Adrian. You were terrified of being caught." The monitor kept drumming its relentless verdict. Thump, 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 thump. Guilty. Guilty. Before Adrian could twist out another excuse, the door swung open, and Richard Knight strode in, his presence swallowing the room. Fury radiated from him in controlled, lethal waves. He had clearly been briefed. He scanned the scene. Amelia pale, fierce, broken on the bed, Adrian cornered and sweating, and the damning twin image frozen on the ultrasound. His eyes landed on his son, and the disappointment there was so vast it pressed on everyone like gravity. "I just had a very enlightening conversation with the hospital administrator," Richard said, his voice chillingly calm. "And I took the liberty of calling your Dr. Pham, who, it seems, can't find his records from your last scan." Adrian went white as chalk. The message was unmistakable. The Knight family's reach was long, and any doctor caught in such a fraud would be ruined for life. "Father, it's a misunderstanding," Adrian began, voice cracking. Silence. Richard's single word slammed the air shut. Adrian, despite all his wealth and power, shrank back like a scolded boy. Richard moved to Amelia's bedside. His eyes, cold steel moments before, softened with a flicker of genuine remorse. "Amelia," he said gently, "I am deeply sorry for the disgrace you endured tonight, and for this unforgivable lie. Whatever my son has done, the Knight family will not abandon you, or your children." He glanced at the monitor, at the 2 unmistakable flickering forms. A hint of wonder crossed his face. 2 heirs instead of 1. Then he turned his full, unforgiving attention back on Adrian, his voice dropping to a growl that rumbled through the room. "You will tell me why, now." Pinned between his father's icy wrath and his wife's devastation, Adrian broke. The lies, the bravado, the empire he'd built on secrets, crumbled to dust. He slumped into a chair in the corner, burying his head in his hands. "It was complicated," he mumbled. "Complicated?" Richard's voice boomed like a judge passing sentence. You lied to your wife about her own child." Adrian lifted his head, eyes bloodshot, voice hoarse with self-pity. "It was Selena," he whispered. She's pregnant too." The air snapped silent. Amelia felt a wave of nausea so sharp she thought she might faint, a betrayal beyond her darkest fears. "I found out a few months ago," Adrian choked out, the confession spilling in a pitiful stream. "She claimed it was mine. She threatened to go public, ruin everything. The company anniversary, the new partnership launch, everything. She wanted me to leave you, marry her. She was obsessed. And your answer," Richard thundered, "was to lie to everyone?" "I was buying time," Adrian shouted, leaping up, pacing like a trapped animal. "I didn't even know if her baby was really mine. I told her I'd handle it. My plan, my stupid, reckless plan, was to lock in the legitimate heir, our son." He turned to Amelia, desperation painted across his features. "I needed him to be the only one male heir, clean, powerful. It would crush Selena's leverage, make her look pathetic if she tried to use her pregnancy against us." The horrifying logic settled over Amelia like poison mist. "And a second baby, a twin, complicated that," she said, her voice hollow. Adrian's eyes flared with frustration, as if her comprehension only made it worse. "Two babies muddied it all. If one was a girl, it weakened the story. I told Fam to focus on the boy, leave the other out. Just for a while, until Selena's mess was handled. Then I'd reveal the twins. I swear to you, Amelia, I would never have denied our child forever. It was a temporary strategic deception." "A strategic deception," Amelia repeated slowly, tasting every acid syllable. "You erased our child from our lives? For strategy?" Amelia's voice trembled, each word razor-sharp. "You made me believe I carried only one baby, grieving a loss I never even knew, just to manage your sordid affair?" The sheer, cold-blooded calculation stole her breath. Adrian Knight hadn't just betrayed her. He had weighed his own children on a scale of corporate optics and found one disposable. He hadn't merely cheated, he had played God. Richard Knight looked at his son with an expression so contemptuous it made the air crackle. "You are a fool, Adrian. A weak, short-sighted fool. You turned a crisis into a catastrophe. You have disgraced your wife, your family name, and your unborn children, just to placate a poisonous woman you were too spineless to cut off." He faced Amelia then, his mind made up. "Amelia," he said, his tone softer, resolute, "you will want for nothing. The full power of the Knight family is yours. You and your children are under my protection." His eyes flicked back to Adrian, his voice plummeting to Arctic cold. "And you are stripped of all duties at Knight Enterprises, effective immediately. Your accounts are frozen. You will remain at the country house in Cameron Highlands. You will not leave until I call for you. You've built your palace of lies. Now live in it. Alone." The sentence landed like a gavel. In a single night, Adrian Knight had fallen from the crown prince of Singapore's tech empire to a disgraced exile, cut off, cornered, undone by his own deceit. He gaped at his father, then at his wife, his mouth working but no words coming. There was nothing left to say. His mask had been ripped away, and with it, everything that had once made him powerful. Amelia looked at him with an icy emptiness where love had once lived. There was no pity left, only a vast, clean silence inside her. The man she had once adored was nothing more than a moral vacuum wrapped in charm. And yet beneath the steel in her veins, a whisper of guilt hissed in the corners of her mind. "You let yourself believe too blindly. You gave him the power to break you." She clenched her fists at her sides, swallowing the ghost of self-blame, turning it into resolve. She would never be that naive woman again. The slap, the terror, the betrayal, it had all forged something new in her. The meek, trusting art curator was gone. In her place stood a mother, of two, a woman who had walked to the edge of ruin and found not a void, but a core of steel. The monitor's twin heartbeats still filled the room, steady, fierce. They were her truth now, her reason to fight, and she would guard them and herself with a ferocity that neither Adrian nor Selena could ever fathom. The war had just begun. The days that followed were a cocoon of forced calm and quiet rage. Amelia stayed at Mount Elizabeth, not just for the medical care, but for sanctuary. Her suite became a war room, a safe fortress from which she began to plan her counterattack. The hematoma stabilized, the threat of preterm labor faded, and each day the two tiny heartbeats grew stronger. They were her fuel. Her mission. Richard Knight proved true to his word. He visited every day, not as an imposing patriarch but as a silent ally. He didn't see a victim. He saw the future matriarch of his legacy, the guardian of 2 heirs. He gave her the best legal team money could buy, a squad of relentless, razor-sharp lawyers renowned for high-stakes divorces. "Spare no cost," Richard told them, right in front of her. "I want this handled like a guillotine, clean, final, and entirely in Mrs. Knight's favor." Adrian was gone, banished to a secluded Knight estate in the hills of Cameron Highlands. His name vanished overnight from the company's executive page, his power wiped out like chalk in rain. His office was cleared out within days. The official statement, carefully scripted by Richard's PR team, claimed Adrian Knight had stepped down for personal health reasons to focus on his family during a complicated pregnancy. It sounded just plausible enough to quiet the sharks, but in hushed corners of boardrooms and private clubs, the real story was gospel. The king had been toppled, swiftly, mercilessly. Selina Chan was dealt with just as precisely. Richard's investigators dismantled her tangled web of debts and secret affairs in record time. The pregnancy she flaunted was real, but a discreet DNA swab from a cafe cup confirmed what Richard suspected. The baby wasn't Adrian's. It belonged to a married Singaporean hotel magnate she'd been seeing on the side. Armed with this evidence, Richard's legal team offered a blunt, ironclad ultimatum: vanish quietly with a one-time settlement and an airtight NDA, or face fraud charges and the full public fury of the Knight dynasty. Selina, ever the practical survivor, took the money and disappeared from Singapore society pages overnight. But for Amelia, these wins were background noise. Her focus narrowed to one purpose. It wasn't revenge on Selina. It wasn't about punishing Adrian anymore. It was about seizing back her narrative and securing an unassailable future for her children. Confined to her hospital suite, Amelia began to transform. The gentle, deferential art curator was gone. In her place was a shrewd tactician who devoured every financial report her legal team brought her. She learned about trusts, shareholding structures, and corporate bylaws with the precision of a seasoned executive. Once she had admired Adrian's ambition. Now she studied the empire he'd built not with awe, but with the critical eye of a conqueror. Every night when sleep refused to come, she reminded herself with brutal clarity, "I cannot be weak again. My children have only me now." The thought steeled her spine when doubt crept in. Her plan, when she finally laid it out to her stunned lawyers and an intrigued Richard Knight, was audacious enough to hush the entire room. "I don't want a simple divorce settlement," she declared one afternoon, her voice firm and even. Sunlight streamed through the hospital window behind her. Propped up in bed, surrounded by balance sheets and governance papers, she looked more like a CEO than a patient. "I don't want a cash payout, or properties, or alimony." Miss V, her lead attorney, a fierce, unflinching negotiator, arched an eyebrow. "Mrs. Knight, with the documented infidelity, the public assault, and the staggering fraud involving your children, you're entitled to one of the largest settlements Singapore has ever seen." "A settlement makes me a pensioner of the Knight family," Amelia said, calm as a blade. "It makes me a wealthy victim. I have no interest in being a victim." Her eyes locked with Richard's, unwavering. "I want Adrian's shares in Knight Enterprises, his voting rights, his board seat, all of it transferred into a trust where I am the sole trustee for the benefit of my children." Silence swallowed the room. Ms. V's mouth fell slightly open. Richard's eyes gleamed, but his expression betrayed nothing else. Amelia wasn't asking for a piece of the empire. She was claiming the throne itself. "He'll never agree to that," Ms. V murmured, almost awed. "It's everything to him. His name, his power, his entire identity." "He will," Amelia said, her tone diamond hard, "because the alternative is simple. I don't sign an NDA. The alternative," Amelia continued, her voice calm as a sharpened blade, "is that I grant a full, exclusive interview to the Wall Street Journal." She let the words settle like a guillotine blade poised to drop. "I will tell them everything about the affair, the public assault by your mistress, and the medically orchestrated fraud you committed to hide one of your own children for the sake of optics." She let the silence stretch. The threat was simple: mutually assured destruction. The scandal wouldn't just bury Adrian Knight's name forever. It would stain Knight Enterprises for a generation, trigger shareholder panic, unleash regulators, and be taught in MBA programs worldwide as the definitive lesson in moral rot and corporate self-destruction. I will detail how Dr. Pham falsified medical records under pressure, she went on, her eyes fixed on Richard. I will explain that my husband's reaction to discovering he had twins wasn't joy, but terror at his lies unraveling. I will lay bare a culture so obsessed with a clean narrative of a single male heir that it would erase a child from existence. Richard said nothing, his fingers steepled, hiding his mouth. But behind his eyes burned something sharp and dangerous. He knew exactly what this was. A flawless, surgically delivered checkmate. Amelia had found the Knight family's soft underbelly, the myth of its spotless legacy, and turned it into her ultimate weapon. She wasn't threatening to take their money. She was threatening to reduce their kingdom to ash. At last, Richard exhaled, and a slow, unmistakable smile curled his lips. It was a smile of unfiltered respect. He'll sign, Richard said simply, turning to Ms. V. Prepare the final documents. The meeting with Adrian was set for a week later. By then, Amelia had left the hospital and settled into a new, secure penthouse, chosen and paid for by her, with an advance from the trust. Neutral ground was arranged, a private conference room at the Sofitel Legend Metropole in Singapore, an enclave of old-world power and polished civility. Amelia entered not as a victim, but as an equal. She no longer hid behind flowing maternity gowns. She had given birth 2 days earlier to 2 small but healthy babies, a boy, Leo, and a girl, Luna. The delivery had been early, but without complications. Her body was exhausted, but her spirit was ironclad. Adrian was already waiting, flanked by his lawyer. He looked small, a husk of the man he'd once been. His tailored suit sagged on his frame. His eyes, once so arrogantly sure, were dull and resigned. He rose shakily when she entered. Amelia, I heard about the babies. Are they? They're fine, she cut in, her tone crisp, professional. She didn't sit across from him, but remained standing, an unspoken reminder of who held the power now. No thanks to you. She nodded for Miss V to slide the papers across the table. Adrian's lawyer scanned them, his eyes widening at each brutal clause. He leaned in, whispering frantically. Adrian just stared at the pages, hollow. This is everything, he rasped, lifting his eyes to hers. My shares, my board seat, my entire life. You have a life, Amelia snapped, her voice as sharp as shattered glass. You have one because I am choosing not to salt the earth beneath your feet. I am choosing to protect the family name for the sake of my children, Amelia said, her voice unwavering, cold but resolute. This is not a punishment, Adrian. It is a consequence. She let that word hang, slicing through the stale air. You've proven you're unfit to be the steward of this legacy, so now I will be. Only then did she sit, spine straight, gaze locked on his. You will have supervised visitation rights. You will receive a generous allowance, enough to live comfortably, but never enough to stir trouble. You will, for all practical purposes, retire from public life. In return, the world will remember you as the man who stepped down for his family. It's a far nobler legacy than the ruin you were creating. She leaned in slightly, voice low and lethal. You should thank me. The silence that followed was dense, heavy with the gravity of a kingdom changing hands. Adrian looked down at the documents, then up at the woman he had once thought pliable, naive. Now he saw her clearly, not the soft art curator who had once adored him, but a queen reborn in iron and fire, holding his entire empire in her steady hands. In the end, his ruin wasn't delivered by a rival. It was delivered by the wife he had underestimated, again and again, until she stood unchallenged over the wreckage of his lies. With a trembling hand, Adrian Knight, the dethroned prince of Singapore's elite, picked up the pen. He signed away his shares, his seat, his future. All to the quiet, undeniable rhythm of 2 tiny heartbeats he had once tried to erase. The Empress's gambit had succeeded, and so the scandal that had once been about a mistress's slap became something else entirely. The tale of a deception buried deep within a powerful family, and the quiet wife who rose from public disgrace to seize the crown. Amelia Knight, once a footnote in her husband's biography, rewrote her own. Not with tears, but with relentless intelligence, a spine of steel, and the unyielding power of a mother's love. She proved that sometimes the greatest strength is forged in betrayal, and that the most devastating revenge isn't to destroy your enemies, but to take from them everything they treasure most. What did you think of Amelia's ultimate power play? Was it true justice or the most brilliant revenge? Tell us in the comments below. So that's how Amelia's story comes to an end, or maybe a new beginning. And you, my wonderful friends, you're still here with me right now, aren't you? If you're still watching to this point, I know deep down that something in this story must have touched your heart. Maybe it whispered to that hidden part of you that knows betrayal can break you, but it can also remake you. Amelia's journey is not just scandal and revenge. It's a reminder that life will test us in the harshest ways. But as the Stoic philosophers say, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Epictetus once wrote, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Amelia didn't win because she destroyed her enemies. She won because she mastered herself first. Her fear, her pain, her rage, and turned them into unshakable resolve to protect what mattered most, her children and her dignity. Maybe some of you are fighting your own unseen wars right now. Maybe you're holding secrets, carrying heartbreak, or facing betrayals that no one else sees. If Amelia's story shows us anything, it's this. You are allowed to be broken, but you are never required to stay broken. Like the Stoics teach us, what stands in the way becomes the way. The very betrayal that shattered her fairy tale gave her the fire to claim a crown no one thought she could wear. So, if this story resonated with you even a little, promise me something. Protect your peace, fight for your truth, and remember you are stronger than the pain trying to bury you. If you felt a spark of strength tonight, help us spread it. Hit the like button, share this story with someone who needs it, and subscribe for more tales that remind us the quietest souls sometimes make the fiercest queens. Thank you for staying till the very end. Until next time, keep your crown polished and your heart unbreakable.